Deconstruction. It's not a conversation that many Christians like to have, but it's one that we certainly need to have because all around us, it seems all too common as young and old begin to question, challenge, and even abandon the faith that they once knew. So as we stated last week, this is deconstruction. It's the process of systemically dissecting and often rejecting the beliefs that you grew up with. I remember the first time I had a friend of mine that grew up with me in church, but they finally told me that they were no longer a Christian. It was emotional for me, for sure, because all of the time that we had together, things like reading the Bible and sitting in small groups, and something happens to you, you begin to question things like, why is this happening? How can someone just stop believing something? And what does this mean for my friendship now with this person? What does it look like? But most importantly, how does this affect my faith? You see, deconstruction is a deep dive into the things that you once believed. It's critically analyzing the contents and the overall worldview of your faith. And you begin to ask questions with yourself concerning Christianity. Is it compatible with my priorities, beliefs, and convictions? Is this outdated, irrelevant, and even harmful for our world today? And maybe you have some friends who are asking these types of questions. Or maybe you've seen influencers on social media kind of take the banner of deconstruction. Or maybe you've started to ask yourself these types of questions. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that this is happening all around us and maybe even in us. So what do we do with it? And how do we handle it well? So if you weren't here with us last week, let me catch you up to speed. Because Daniel told us that deconstruction isn't always a bad thing. In fact, for followers of Jesus, it's absolutely necessary. Now that might be confusing to some of you because isn't deconstruction the process of abandoning faith? Shouldn't that be something that we're afraid of, something that we fear? Well, let me explain. If we're going to take a look at the history of the church, what do you think we'd find? I think we'd find a lot, but here's a quick scroll through some of the things that took place. So I want to show you over here, a quick scroll through church history. If we look at this, this is going to be a timeline, and there's going to be a ton of different dates and things that happen. I'm just going to scroll through it because you'll find that there's a lot of good things and some bad things. This is 2,000 years of church history. Right? And throughout all of it, there's definitely things that you would say, man, I've seen God's hand in this. I've seen his faithfulness. I've seen how he's worked and used the church. But there's also some dark parts of church history. You'll find places where you see a misuse of power. You'll see spiritual manipulation, benefiting financially from the poor and the marginalized, a misuse of scripture to justify things that pertain to the issues of racism and slavery and so much more. And the story is not completely different because even today, one of the massive critiques that we kind of find within Christianity is that what's been handed to us by previous generations is really just an institution that the church has now been weaponized by political parties to push agendas that it was never intended to carry out. This is where deconstruction doesn't just become inevitable, but absolutely necessary. Because along the way, the church has found itself picking things up that it was never intended to carry. And we must constantly be evaluating and asking the hard questions. Is this what God intended? Even though it's maybe popular within Christian circles to believe these types of things, is it consistent with what God's word has to say? You see, unfortunately, many people, they never get to that place. All they see is the baggage and the problems, and they bounce. They abandon the faith for all the wrong reasons, the ways that the church has behaved, and all the difficult things they have to understand within scriptures. And this really saddens me. But Daniel challenged us last week to question and even adjust our convictions and beliefs on the basis of who Jesus is and what he calls us to do. To put it simply, don't let the shortcomings of people and the mishandlings of church power and the difficult things to understand in the Bible be the defining moments in this conversation regarding doubt and even questioning. Instead, look to Jesus. Who was it that Jesus claimed to be? And what did he claim to do? And who did he claim it for? And who does he call me to be in light of that? So where do we look then to find those types of answers? Well, the only place that you can look is the Bible. See, without the Bible, we would have no clue of who Jesus was and what he did. It's the single source that gives us a glimpse into what God has for us and what God actually looks like and what he wants for us to do in this world. But doesn't that bring up a whole different set of issues? How do I know the Bible is true? You see, many skeptics would argue that the Bible is outdated and irrelevant and filled with contradictions. Can the Bible even be trusted? If so, on what grounds? If you're going to tell me to look at the person of Jesus, and the Bible's really the only place that I can truly learn about who he is, then what is it that makes the Bible any more credible than any other form of religious writings? In fact, this is actually a major problem that many people have with the Bible because they ask this question, Can the Bible be used to prove the Bible? I actually found an article that deals with this exact topic. And the reason why it's interesting is because they look at it from the perspective of both Christians and non-Christians. Because both groups of people, if they're honest and if they think long enough and hard enough about what the Bible actually is, you naturally kind of arrive at this place where you ask that question, because it often seems like, and what this article calls it, is really what you're dealing with is circular reasoning. Now, this might be a term that you've heard, but just for the sake of everyone and making sure that we're all on the same page, this is really what circular reasoning is. It's this process in which you prove something to be true, and you kind of get stuck in this like circular form of logic. So, for instance, if A proves B and B proves A, then A proves B, then B proves, and you never get out of it. You just get stuck. So within the context of the Bible, this is what it looks like. How do I know how do I know the testimonies of Jesus are true? Well, I know that that's true because it says so in the Bible. Well, how do I know that the Bible's true? Like, what makes the Bible a legitimate source of truth? Well, because Jesus said that it's true. You see how you get stuck in this circle? That's actually really problematic. And at first glance, we're like, man, is the Bible true? What does this actually mean for us? But when we look at the Bible, we actually get a completely different story. Did you know that the word Bible isn't even found anywhere within the actual book of the Bible, like within the book? It's only on the front cover. And that's because the word Bible didn't happen until much later on. In fact, it's a Latin word, and what it really means is that it's a combination of many writings. So this is what this article says. It says, although the Bible is often considered a single cohesive work, it's actually an anthology of ancient writings by many different authors over centuries of time. So an anthology just means a bunch of smaller works. So we often think of the Bible as one book, because our Bible is bound within the cover of one Bible, right? But it's actually a collection of smaller books that were written over a 1,500-year span with roughly 40 different authors. So this would lead many to assume that with this many hands on this type of project and with that much time, then the Bible would really be just a collection of random stories and writings, completely disconnected from one another. But when you open up the Bible, that's not what you find at all. You see, God guided the hands of these humans and these authors as they told the greatest story ever. This isn't one book or one person saying the Bible is super great and therefore you should trust it. Because if that was the case, then we would have a reason to question, is this circular reasoning? Like, says who? Who else is saying that the Bible is trustworthy? What evidence do you bring to the table that would lead me to have any sense of confidence or the ability to trust and believe the legitimacy of the Bible? Right? But the Bible is multiple sources with multiple different eyewitness accounts. It's 66 different books, 40 different authors who all together tell one story, the story of the Bible. See, this is when I feel like the Bible Project is actually a really helpful resource. So if you've never heard of the Bible Project, let me show it to you. The Bible Project has dedicated their entire organization to really helping people understand the story of the Bible. And they have a ton of different resources, but I want to show you just one. So if you ever go to their website, you can also find them on YouTube if that's easier, but they have really helpful resources that kind of help point some of this stuff out. And this is part of their study notes, actually, from one of the videos that they made. And they say exactly what we just talked about, that the Bible is a really large book, and it's made up of a bunch of different smaller books. But that they're going to say is it's actually a lot of different types of literature. There's ancient history and poetry and the letters. And again, it's written over 1,500 different years. It can be super difficult to understand where you're at because it's large and it's complex. But once you grasp the core storyline and you understand how it all fits together, it actually becomes really, really incredibly powerful and even simple to understand and see. So the Bible is a diverse set of literature, right? And it may appear fragmented at first, but ultimately it presents itself as a unified and epic narrative that points us to Jesus. And when you know the storyline, it all of a sudden makes sense. And so the Bible begins with this creation account, right? And the royal task that he gives to humanity to care for the earth. But there's a rebellion. There's a fallout between God and man. But God makes his covenant with Israel. And throughout that process, Jesus is promised to come, and he does come. And his kingdom is established and set up. And then there's the spreading of the kingdom through the people. And all of this can be seen throughout the scriptures. And then there's ultimately the telling of the return of the king. And so this is what the Bible is set up to do and how it's intended to work. So even though it might be simple once you understand how the the Bible works and the plots and all of those types of things, it's still really difficult. And it was even difficult for many of Jesus' followers who lived every day of their lives with him. Luke 24, it actually tells this story that I think is really helpful for us, and it's helpful for us to understand really how all of this plays out, and even deals with kind of their doubts and their questionings and their process of learning as to what the Bible actually is. So Luke 23, it starts with Jesus' crucifixion. He's killed, right? He's crucified on a Roman cross. He's buried, and then he raises from the dead. And in the midst of this process, there's people who have encountered Jesus in his resurrected form, but there's many people who haven't. So there's two stories going on around. Like, Jesus is killed and he's dead, and there's other people saying, no, he's alive now. He's risen from the dead. So this story picks up with two of Jesus' followers who have not yet seen Jesus' resurrected body, but they're hearing all about it. They're actually talking. They're traveling to this small little village called Emmaus, and as they're traveling there, they're recounting all the things that they've heard. Jesus actually shows up on this road and he begins to walk with them. But they have no clue that it's actually him. The text says that their eyes were kept from seeing that it was him. I don't know what that means. Maybe Jesus in his resurrected form looked different. The text doesn't tell us. But the point is, they had no clue that they were actually walking with Jesus. Jesus hears their conversation and he begins to ask them, what are you guys talking about? And they think this guy is crazy. Like, you're absolutely insane. You must be new, right? Because you don't know what's actually going on. You haven't heard, like, everybody's talking about this. And Jesus politely tells them, well, tell me a little bit more. And he says, what things are you guys talking about? And this is what they say. They said, what we're talking about is concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who is a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since all of these things had happened. So they literally tell Jesus, we had hoped that you would be the one who would come to rescue us. This is what Jesus' reply to them is. In verse 25, he says to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And so they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he was going to go further, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us. It's toward evening. This day is now far spent, so the day's almost over. And so he went with them, and he sat with them at the table, and he took the bread, and he blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? So there's this incredible scene where Jesus says, you're foolish. Like, you guys have walked with me. You guys have read the Old Testament. You guys have been engrossed in the scriptures. You didn't know that this was all pointing towards me? You didn't know that I was supposed to die? And so they beg him, like, continue to walk with us, continue to teach us, like, continue to open up the scriptures and show us all of the things that are, like, woven within it about who Jesus is. Right? This is the major point. And they're like, we want more of this. They're so hungry. So Jesus comes into their home. He sits with them. They eat dinner together. And it's at this moment that this is a familiar scene. Like, as he breaks the bread and as he gives them wine, they're reminded of a moment when Jesus had done this previously. And they all of a sudden, oh my goodness, this is Jesus. And in that moment, he like vanishes. He disappears. They don't see him anymore. But that's not what the text is like most amazed by. See, it doesn't dwell on that. What it dwells on is this, that their hearts burned within them as they opened the scriptures. Why is that? Right? Because they found a new way to read the Bible. They found a way in which they saw Jesus on every page of scripture. So the Messiah, that they thought, man, we had hoped that he was going to be this person. He actually was. Right? I wish I could have been a part of that conversation. I wish I could have listened to Jesus as he unpacked the scriptures and showed how every story pointed Jesus. We don't get that privilege, but I can only imagine. Maybe it looked something a little like this.
The Bible is not a series of disconnected stories. It is a single narrative in which every story, every character points beyond itself to one who is greater. The story of Adam and Eve is not just about the first man and woman. There is a true and better Adam who passed the test in the garden and whose obedience is ascribed to us. There is a true and better Abel who, though innocently slain, has blood that cries out not for our condemnation, but for our acquittal. There is a true and better Abraham who answered the call of God to leave all the comfortable and familiar and go out into the void to create a new people of God. There is a true and better Isaac, the son of laughter, of grace, who was not just offered up by his father on the mount, but was truly sacrificed for us all. There is a true and better Jacob, who wrestled and took the blow of justice we deserve, so we, like Jacob, only receive the wounds of grace that wake us up and discipline us. There is a true and better Joseph, who at the right hand of the king forgives those who betrayed and sold him and uses his new power to save them. There is a true and better Moses who stands in the gap between the people and the Lord and who mediates a new covenant. There is a true and better rock of Moses who, struck with the rod of God's justice, now gives us water in the desert. There is a true and better Job, the truly innocent sufferer, who then intercedes for and saves his foolish friends. There is a true and better David, whose victory becomes his people's victory, though they never lifted a stone to accomplish it themselves. There is a true and better Esther, who didn't just risk losing an earthly palace, but lost the ultimate heavenly one, who didn't just risk his life, but gave his life to save his people. There is a true and better Jonah, who was cast out into the storm so that we could be brought in. There is a true and better Passover lamb, innocent, perfect, helpless, slain so the angel of death will pass over us. He's the true temple, the true prophet, the true priest, the true king, the true sacrifice, the true lamb, the true light, and the true bread. The Bible is not a series of disconnected stories. It is a single narrative that points to one person, Jesus.
So I can only imagine that maybe that's what it was like to hear Jesus tell the beautiful story of how he's on every page. But I know this for sure. This is the way that we should read the Bible, looking for Jesus on every page. See, I remember when I started to read the Bible this way, everything started to change for me. It started out as something that was really just piqued my interest as I learned how to read the Bible in a new way. But then something deeper happened, something changed, it became more. It wasn't just a story that I was learning about, but really I began to see how my life was wrapped up on every page as well. It wasn't just about how every story pointed to Jesus, but rather how every story was pointing me to Jesus. Like the human rebellion that took place at the beginning of the story, it spoke of my rebellion too. The people's need for rescue was really my need for rescue too. The separation that the Bible spoke of between God and man was really my separation too. But the news, it gets better. Like the one who was promised to come on behalf of the sins of the people was my promised one too. The one who would be crucified on a Roman cross, taking the punishment for the people's sins and wrongdoings, was bearing my punishment as well too. See, the one who invited all to come through faith was inviting me to come as well too. The one who promised to give his Spirit to live with them was promising that by faith he would give me his Spirit as well too. And the one who promised to come again to fully usher in his kingdom was promising this for me as well too. You see, the Bible told me what to do with my own brokenness. The places when I looked in my life and I saw all the ways in which I needed help and rescue. It told me what to do with my world and the problems that experience as well. And it didn't just tell me to simply be a better person or try harder. It told me of one who was better for me. It told me of Jesus. See, when you take a deep dive into the life of Jesus, what the scriptures tell us about, I believe this is what happens to you. You actually meet Jesus. If you're dealing with doubts or questioning, maybe even deconstructing, open up the Bible with one central mission. I want to see for myself who this Jesus guy is. See, I'll be honest with you. I went through a season of deconstructing. I grew up in church. Parents were both Christians. I was a part of a youth group. But towards the end of high school and throughout the first few years of college for me, I began to wrestle with what it was that I believe. This lasted for like 2 years. I had questions and doubts. You know what happened? I opened up the Bible to look for answers. Half of me thought that what I was just going to find was that the Bible didn't have sufficient answers. Like I thought it was going to be outdated and irrelevant. And I thought that would give me an excuse to kind of maybe even begin to walk away. But you know what changed? It wasn't that all of my concerns were answered. It wasn't that I no longer had any questions. It was that in my pursuit for answers, I met Jesus there on the pages of an ancient book. And what I felt is exactly what the two dudes on the road to Emmaus felt, that they kind of look at each other and say in Luke 24:32, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road to Emmaus as he opened the scriptures?" You see, my hope for you is that when you pick up the Bible, that you do it as often as you can, and that you bring your questions and your concerns to the source itself, and that most importantly, along the way, that you would see Jesus. You see, deconstruction doesn't have to be scary. Let it be the process in which your faith becomes your own. See, this is necessary for every young person. So often the faith we think that we have isn't even really ours. It's a version of someone else's faith that they've just given to us. But that just doesn't work. It can't be the faith of your parents or the faith of your small group leader. It must be your faith. But this doesn't mean that you have to do it alone. In fact, I would encourage you, get help. Lean on your small group and use resources like the Bible Project. We say this often. We are not afraid of your questions. We are not afraid of you wrestling. We're not trying to force you to believe something or convince you that we're right. We simply want to invite you to see the person of Jesus on every page of Scripture.